Okay, everybody, welcome. What's that? We'll get started. My name is Will. I'm with the Alaska Airmen Association. Welcome. We're here with BWI today talking about aviation insurance. So this webinar is designed just to give you an opportunity, essentially, and those of you who are online to ask questions pertaining to aviation insurance in Alaska. Before we do that, I want to just introduce Kristen and Matt with BWI, who are going to talk a little bit about what they do in Alaska before we get started with questions. So,
awesome.
All right,
Thank you.
Good.
Awesome. All right. Which way am I pointing? This way or this way? Okay.
I think both ways.
Yeah, both ways. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Matt White. I'm the second generation owner of BWI. My father founded the company in 1977. He loved writing insurance, and he had his pilot's license. He had a little Cessna 150, and he wanted to write airplane insurance because there just wasn't that much competition out there. So he started the company in 1977. He is a 185 CFI guy, owner, and he specialized in 180 and 185 insurance for the first 20, 30 years. I purchased the company, or I came on board in 2011. Started learning the business, got my insurance license, learned all about the world of aviation insurance. In 2016, in January 2016, I purchased the company. And after I purchased the company, the first thing that I did is I called a meeting with one of the top vice presidents of AIG. And I said, her name was Mary Beth. And I said, Mary Beth, we would like to write insurance in Alaska. What can we do? And she said, Matt, we talked about some things at a PowerPoint, and she said, you guys can start writing 180 and 185 insurance in Alaska. So we came up in May, a couple months later, May of 2016, we went to the gathering, sponsored by the Airmen. We had a blast, we had a great time, and we started writing 180 and 185 insurance in Alaska, only 180 and 185 insurance. After that, we had such a good time. Up here, we saw that this is the world of aviation. There's no better place to be a pilot in Alaska. We loved it so much. We said this is going to be one of our big focuses at BWI moving forward. And so a couple of years later, we kept coming up to the gathering, kept meeting all of you pilots and aircraft owners. And we said, you know what? We would like to open up more insurance options for aircraft owners in Alaska. So we started talking to some of our other insurance companies based in the lower 48. That didn't necessarily write in Alaska, write insurance in Alaska, or do business in Alaska. And our idea was simple. If we could get more insurance companies writing business in Alaska, then there's more competition. We can get lower rates. If we can get lower rates, we can help more people get aircraft insurance in Alaska. That's been our goal since 2016. We added 2 more companies in 2017, 2018, and then we added a couple more companies in 2019 and 2020. So we have 4 or 5 companies now that write business with us in Alaska. Some companies only write with us in Alaska. Most of the companies write with us and a couple of our competitors. So we're a broker. We use our insurance companies to write insurance. We do not write directly like a Venco, for example. So that's our mission. That's our goal. And that's the last couple of years of our history in Alaska. We love the aviation pilot community, and we're here to stay. We're here to help and support you guys as best as we can.
Put me in the hot seat.
Go for it.
Can you go 2 slides over?
This is Kristen Suarez. She's our executive manager of BWI. I'm sure she has a couple things to say.
So just generally speaking, well, first, thank you guys for having us out here. It's always exciting to kind of share some of the knowledge that we have with you guys, because unfortunately, I feel like there's a lack of that in the insurance industry. There's a lot of things that don't get shared with a lot of, not necessarily our clients, but a lot of pilots out there. They don't understand why certain things are happening. They don't understand why the rates are where they're at, or why it's challenging to secure certain insurance policies, depending on what you're flying and other aspects. But just to kind of give you guys a brief overview, we do anything aviation related, even up in Alaska. So we're not just doing pleasure business, we're doing Part 135, commercial operation, products, policies, workers' comp. So if you have businesses that revolve around aviation, we can help with all aspects of your business. But most importantly, we enjoy, in my opinion, taking care of kind of like your mom and pops, your pilots that are flying recreationally, because you guys are the ones that are getting hit, in my opinion, with those insurance premiums that don't make sense, because these big dogs are having claims, things are happening to the larger charter operations, and unfortunately it trickles down and it hits the little guys a lot harder than it does the commercial operators. And so I think instead of us standing up here and talking your guys' ear off, I think what I'm hearing that's going to be most beneficial is letting you guys kind of take the floor and ask any initial questions, and then we'd be happy to answer any questions that you guys have related to, you know, insurance, the policies, the things that cover them, and then also what's driving the rates, what are some products that you guys are needing that are maybe having a hard time getting access to. So I'm going to kind of hand the floor off to you guys, and then we can kind of go from there. Age. So age is going to be a factor, you know, not just up here, but even in the lower 48. And so what we've noticed most recently is if you're currently insured, your current insurance company is going to take care of you the best as you progress into mid 70s, late 70s. There are certain insurance companies that are better for what I call like our senior pilot community. And so if you're working with the right broker, it's important for them to make sure that they're moving you at the right time. So let's just say, for example, you're 68, 69. Usually in our agency, we start having these conversations with you. Hey, you're approaching this age because we know this insurance company is going to do X, Y, and Z and limit your coverage after the age of 75. We're going to suggest we move you to this insurance company because they're going to be better for you long term. So it's definitely an important conversation to have with your broker as we're approaching the age of 70. It's also important to not be switching companies or looking to switch companies after the age of 70. It's very difficult to secure a new policy. So for example, Falcon, they do the same thing that we do. Let's just say you're with Falcon and you call and you're like, hey, my premium went up. I'm interested in a quote for you guys. Or through you guys, excuse me. If we go out and we shop the market, two things are probably going to happen. One, let's just say you're 72, you're up in Alaska, we're probably going to have a really hard time even getting a quote because you're coming in as a new business versus a renewal. So when you have a relationship with an insurance company as a renewal client, they're more inclined to continue to keep you renewed, continue to have the coverages that you already have because you have that relationship built. But if you're trying to switch carriers after 70, it becomes a lot more challenging because again, you're a new customer, haven't established that relationship with the insurance company or the underwriters. So our suggestion is as we approach 70, you want to have those conversations with your broker. You want to make sure you're with the right insurance company that's going to take care of you long term, because there are companies out there that will happen is they'll start limiting your coverages. And then let's just say you're 75, they start limiting your coverages. Well, now it might be too late to move to a different carrier. So usually that sweet spot between like 68 and 70 that we want to make sure you're with the right company.
We have a question from Tom George. He says, do you write coverage for independent CFIs? I've had several calls on this topic today. Tom is
Okay, awesome. So I know that was a question that we were expecting to get. CFI insurance and renters insurance is a very challenging product to get up in Alaska. And so we are actually, well, I'm specifically attending Oshkosh in July, and we are planning on having a meeting with one of the presidents of one of the insurance companies that we write with in the lower 48 to kind of talk them a little bit into feeling a little bit more comfortable to bring CFI and renters insurance to Alaska. We do currently have one insurance company, which is AIG. We work with them daily. They do offer CFI and renters insurance up in Alaska. It's not the most competitive rate. I know Avemco recently is pulling out of offering that coverage up in Alaska. So we are working kind of quickly because now that we attended the Alaska gathering, I'm hearing that it's a product that's really needed up here. So we are hoping that we can get another insurance company up here to offer some more competitive rates for our renter pilots and for our independent CFIs that are needing that coverage. So it's something that's in the works, but we do have a market. It's just not the prettiest price, if I'm being honest.
So why is this so difficult? You know, CFI down in the lower 48 or up here teaching basic pilot stuff. I don't see how that makes a difference. Is there more accidents up here with CFIs versus down there? Or?
No, I don't know if you want to determine.
I would say a couple factors. First of all, it's hard to understand all of the companies that we work with are based in the lower 48. They're based in Texas, they're based in Atlanta. And so sometimes they don't fully understand kind of the pilot and aircraft atmosphere in Alaska. And then you combine that with a couple kind of losses, you know, that are hard to retrieve. Whenever an airplane crashes in Alaska, a lot of the times, it's far out, you know, in the bush somewhere, and that aircraft has to be retrieved. So I'm talking about just general aircraft insurance, and it has to be brought back in with a helicopter, which is very expensive. So there's just some of those extra costs. And then, you know, the insurance companies being based in the lower 48, that's what's, I think, limiting the products and things we can offer up here.
I think there's just a general fear of Alaska because they've never worked up in this community before. And so that's kind of why we specifically opened an office up here. So we can say we're based up here, we can get feedback and be a little bit more involved in the community to take back to these insurance companies that aren't as involved in hopes to kind of open their eyes and get them to realize this isn't as scary of an environment as they make it out to be. Sometimes they make it seem like this is like a total, like a different country. They make it seem like what happens up in Alaska is scary. And from what I get with my clients is most of you guys are pretty safe pilots. I mean, there's really no difference besides you guys do a lot more backcountry flying than maybe, you know, down in the lower 48. But again, that's happening down there too. So it's just something we're just trying to get them to open up their eyes a little bit more to offer those benefits that they offer in the lower 48 up in Alaska as well.
I don't know, I'm not sure I'm buying it, just because those people they're all that insurance industry, it's very data driven.
Right.
And so I'm not sure if we don't know about Alaska. They know their market, and they're very, very, very data driven. So statistics and all that kind of stuff. I can't imagine they're just gun shy about working up here. There's got to be a real reason.
Well, and I mean, anytime you look at like notwithstanding like the loss ratio, anytime there's a claim or an accident, you know, the helicopter retrievals, those things are what scare the insurance companies away from wanting to do business up here. For the renters policies and CFI insurance, even in the lower 48, it's a limited market. We don't have, I mean, we write with 14 insurance companies. Not all of those companies even offer renters insurance or CFI. So the problem is when it comes to that specific product, there's already a limited market available. So now it's just trying to get those one or two companies that don't write up here, that have never written up here, to be a little bit more open-minded to offering that product up here. So again, just something that we're working on, but it is challenging to fight these companies to be willing to offer additional products up here because they've never done it before. So they almost have to take a leap of faith to be either trusting us or other insurance agents to start providing additional products up here. But there's like you said, there's a reason. We don't necessarily always get that reason though either. So we only get, you know, the information that's provided to us, unfortunately.
Do you guys know if there are more incidents with CFIs in Alaska than elsewhere?
That I couldn't answer
I don't have, yeah,
specifically, no.
I wouldn't have that data yet.
I mean, I think I could genuinely say I've never turned in a CFI claim up here, so I don't, that's just me personally with, you know, the business that we have. Any other questions or topics of the discussion?
I got one.
Of course.
She who knows all has just agreed that we need to buy it.
Okay.
Where do I start?
So my suggestion is if you're looking to purchase an aircraft, are you a pilot already? Okay, so, you know, well, right now aircraft are going like hotcakes, which I'm sure you guys all know. But the insurance is definitely something that you want to look into from, like, I would say before you even purchase an aircraft. So for us, for example, you can, you know, look on Barnstormers, you know, anywhere online, find a year, make, and model of an aircraft that you're interested in purchasing, and you can give us a call. You don't have to have a specific tail number, and we can put together a proposal for you specifically for that aircraft. It could be one or two different aircrafts. Maybe you're trying to compare, say I'm interested in that, you know, 172, or maybe I want to get into a 188 because I want to possibly do a tail load. We can run those rates for you and give you an idea before you would pull the trigger on an aircraft. That way, the one that knows all can decide, you know, if the rate, depending on the aircraft, is going to drive what aircraft to purchase. So you don't have to be an aircraft owner to get those rates. Like I said, you just need a year, make, and model, rough estimate on the whole value that you're looking at, and then we can put together what we call like an indication. So it's not bindable, but it gives you an idea of what you're looking at.
What do you need about the pilot?
Just basic pilot information. So, you know, date of birth, what kind of license and ratings you have, your overall hours, in that aircraft. So that's definitely something that's driving rates in here is pilot experience and make and model. So if, you know, you're only flown fixed wing aircraft and you go buy a tail wheel, you're a 0-time tail wheel pilot, no time to make and model, you can expect your premium is going to be substantially higher than in an aircraft, say you learned at a 172, you have 100 hours in that, than getting into an aircraft that you've been flying recently. Yes, sir.
Yeah, two questions. First one is, as a CFI, I've been trying to encourage folks to go for their wings program. Does that really have any effects insurance wise? I don't say that.
I personally don't think so.
No, those kinds of things help,
They
like when
help,
it
but
comes to a conversation. The problem is there's not like a box that insurance companies will say like, hey, has your client done this? A lot of times what we'll do is we'll pick up the phone and call an underwriter and be like, hey, I know my client's done X, Y, and Z training over the last 12 months. Can that help bring his price down? Can we not have such a substantial premium increase? So we use it, but it's not a guaranteed, you know, yes or no, it's gonna change your premium.
The biggest thing that affects the rate is time in make and model in that aircraft make and model. So if you're looking to purchase an airplane, if you can get any hours in similar make and model aircraft before you start your insurance policy, that's the number one thing. Of course, license ratings, the instrument rating, all that kind of stuff, that helps. Make and model, everybody's look at, they look at control time, if you're in tail wheel, seat time, they look at all that stuff. Make and model is the number one thing. And an aircraft insurance policy is an annual policy. So let's say you're going to buy this airplane, you have no hours. Okay. We send that to our underwriters. Our underwriters come back and say, wow, here's a great pilot, but he had 0 hours in this airplane. Okay. So we're going to, instead of the normal rate, you know, he's buying, he's transitioning this airplane, we're going to increase the premium for the first year by 50-60%. First year, he's got 0 hours, and hopefully he gets 70, 80, 100 hours in that aircraft. And then next year at renewal, that rate should go back down 50-60%. So if you start an insurance policy and you have 0 hours in the aircraft, you're going to pay, you know, a premium because the insurance company has more of a risk. They think they have more of a risk. If you come to us and you say, hey, when I buy this plane and I start that insurance policy, I'm already going to have 20 hours in the airplane, makes a huge difference on your premium on the insurance side. If you start a policy with 0 hours and then a month later you call me and say, Matt, I've got 20 hours. Will my rate go down? No, because it's written on an annual basis. So you start that policy with 0 hours, you're going to pay that price the entire year until next year at renewal when we go and say, how many hours did you fly last year? Let's see what we can do with our underwriters. Does that help at all?
Is there a standard hours that where it's from?
I would say 0 to 25 is the first. You say 0 to 25. Every company is different.
Yeah.
So we work with 12 companies. Every single company likes different airplanes. They will write CFI insurance, other companies won't. We have one company that won't even look at a 210. They don't send us a 210. We won't look at it, we don't quote it, we won't write it, nothing. Every company has their own little quirks about what they like to write and what they don't like to write.
I say for your first year purchase, you know, I tell my clients 50 to 100 hours, just because it has to be a substantial difference. I mean, even 20 hours, that's great. But to negotiate that with an underwriter, they're gonna be like, hey, that's great, but they're still a newer pilot. And so to see a good difference, I always give a target of 50 to 100, because then that way it's kind of showing, you know, maybe you're flying at least an hour a week in that aircraft and you're really trying to get accustomed to it. I know you got a second question.
In the second one, can you touch on the rate of change of rates over the last few years? And obviously, they've been increasing. I haven't actually tracked it or logged it, but it seems like what's going on?
Like how much it's increasing and increasing.
Even with increased experience in hours and
Right.
tracking cycles, it's still going way up.
So this is a quick summary. There are 500 plus auto car insurance companies. There are 12 aircraft insurance companies, and only 5 of them write. Of those 12, only 5 write the last. We had 18 aircraft insurance companies 3 or 4 years ago. 6 of them went out of business. So, like in car insurance, just to give you an idea of how volatile our market is. In car insurance, if you have 5 out of 500 go out of business, the rest of the 495 companies, is it going to change the rate? No, they don't care, right? 5 companies. In aircraft insurance, if you have 40% of the companies go out of business, the remaining 12 companies, what are they going to do? Well, we got to stay in business. We're going to raise the rates. So those rates are going to very volatile. It goes up, And when more markets come in, hey, we want to get an aircraft insurance, we want to make money. Now we have 20 markets, everybody's competing, all the rates go down. So aircraft insurance is very volatile. There's only 12 companies, they control the entire market. And out of those 12 companies, they're all trying to make a profit, we're trying to stay in business. And so they each have decided, you know, their niche of the market, what do they want, right? Specialize in, some companies only specialize in student pilots and transition pilots. They will not quote your Cessna 172 with a qualified pilot. Other companies specialize in non-women, CFI insurance. So every company is different, and there's a lot of volatility. As far as the market rates, it's a 10-year cycle, basically, in aircraft insurance. So from 2008 to 2018, rates have gone down every like 5 to 10, 15% every year. 2018, we hit rock bottom. That's when those 6 companies went out of business. You had 12 companies left. So from 2018, hey, we're going to raise the rate. We're going to raise the rate probably, I don't know, 20, 30% on average. I mean, we have customers that get 10% increases, and we have customers that get 100% increases in one single year. So, and we can't, you know, we don't control that. We just work with them. So I would say the average is between, I would say 10 to 25 to 30% every year since 2018. Of course, you have high and low, you have different aircraft situations. That's kind of how the market works. So now, a year ago, we had our first new company come in. More companies will come in. Probably within a couple of years, you'll get to the high part of that and we'll start going back down. Does that help at all?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Of those 5 companies that are in the list, they all write floats?
No.
How many write floats?
One company that we write with only writes floats. The other 3 will write floats. Yes, all of those companies write floats. But one of them only writes floats, they don't write wheels, and the other companies will kind of write back and forth.
One of the differences is between like us and say like a Venco, because I know a lot of you guys are over the Venco as well, is how the float policy is handled throughout the year. And so each different insurance company handles those changes. So say, for example, you're only on floats, right, for a couple months out of the summer, and then you're either on wheels and skis for a couple months, and then maybe storage for a couple months. So depending on the specifics of how you utilize your aircraft all year long is going to depend on what company and carrier is going to be the best one for you to consider. So for example, we have clients that just use floats, and then come winter, their aircraft is stored for 6 months until the lake unfreezes and they can fly floats again. But then we also have clients that do it all. They do the wheels, the floats, the skis, and then they store for a little bit. So depending on how your year looks is going to depend on which of those companies is going to be the best option for you. So that way you don't either have to call and make changes, or you only have to call to make one change. Maybe you're just going down to storage. So it just depends on your specific risk is going to depend on what company is going to have the best needs for you, or provide the best product for your needs.
And each of our companies is different. So one company will, if you're on wheels, they will cover wheels and skis automatically. No questions asked, they'll cover it. Another company, if you're on wheels and you don't tell them I may be on skis for this amount of time, and you put skis on and have an accident, they're going to say there's no coverage. So not only can we throw that in, but they also have each of them have different little key points that you have to look at. So one of the things is if you're with a company that automatically covers skis, and we find a rate with you with another company that doesn't cover skis, obviously we have to re-ask you the question, are you going to be on skis? And if so, how long? So we can build that and make sure you have coverage.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, apologies to the body for coming in late. We talked about fine. Approximately 10,000 hours in the in the last. So how's that? I mean, the old guys are out of the insurance market. Yeah. And but how did you factor that in age? How does that work out for, right? Point I came home.
So I know for us specifically, I know we kind of touched on a little bit, and we actually had a big conversation about this after the Alaska gathering that we were up here at, because that's what I'm hearing a lot of is that senior community isn't getting the same amount of resources that the rest of the community is getting as far as securing insurance policies. especially if say you sold an aircraft and now you're trying to buy a new one, and then now you can't secure a policy anywhere. Unfortunately for us specifically, because we're at the mercy of the insurance companies, because we're the middleman, in Alaska, after about 69 or 70, it's really difficult to switch carriers and or start a new policy if it's a new purchase. I'm not sure what a Vemco's age cap is. Usually I will tell my clients to always try to call a Vemco because I do know they have a little bit more wiggle room. So if you come to us and we can't help you, that's usually what I suggest, because it never hurts to ask them. But for us, we are pretty set by this, you know, the boundaries of the insurance companies that 69 to 70 age gap. Now, if you're already with us, we can continue offering you insurance as long as you continue, you know, flying regularly. We're not having any kind of claims. Our companies will continue to write you. But as a new policy holder, it's very challenging. And unfortunately, I don't have the answer because we don't have a company that's even willing to look at those types of risks. That's why I'm the first to offer a Vemco, because our goal here is to make sure that you guys can find a product that fits your needs.
Have you tried a Vemco?
What's happened is, I was 135 for several years, and what happened was their shirt. We had all the wrecks and stuff, things go out there.
Yep.
And so that's had a big effect, that's changed my insurance carrier right there. And I'm not picking on it, but it's state fact, but when you're 77 years old, you've got $10,000 in cover here in Alaska, and you can't hardly get insurance. It's, I mean, I go with them for sure.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. My dad's 78 and he's a CFIs, owns a 185, hasn't had a claim. If he came up to Alaska tomorrow and, you know, he knows all the underwriters and said, I need an Alaska insurance policy, they would all say that. It's just, you know, that's how it is, fortunately.
And not that it helps, but this is a struggle that we have even in the lower 48.
Yeah.
So that's not even just an Alaska thing. That's senior guidelines and age restrictions are a problem that we have all throughout the lower 48 as well. There's a little bit more wiggle room depending on like what kind of aircraft you're flying in the lower 48. If it's a fixed gear like 172, we might be able to push the limits a little bit more. But it's not just this community, so it's not specific to just you guys up here. It's something that we're struggling with every day for our pilots after the age of 70.
So unfortunately, can we do anything to help you today? No, but what we can do is educate anybody that's under 70 and get them in the right companies now. That's the best thing that we can do right now for the future.
I was just trying to figure out why the old guys are, I mean, it seems like we're getting going with the other guys that are having wrecks. I mean, I don't think it's one particular age group that's having accidents.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a data.
Am I wrong?
I don't know. We have a client, we have an accident, we have 5,500 aircraft insured. And out of our aircraft that we insure, we have an accident or a claim reported to us every single day. So, and I don't have the data whether it's older pilots or not. Can't tell you that truthfully. I don't know. You know, we have all different types of people have an accident. So probably our insurance companies would have that data, but I don't have that.
Okay, I want to ask a question here from the online audience. Actually, Paul, do you want to speak up here about your question, or do you want me to ask it for you? Yeah, he's not. Okay, Paul is asking, he'd like to know more about EAD aircraft, specifically liability only, liability full, etc.
Specific to the make model.
It's a good question. Paul, if you're there and you want to ask your question, you can. Otherwise, I'm going to move on to the next question. Okay, Adam, are you present? You want to speak up for a second about your question?
Yeah, I'm here. So it looks like Paul just wrote back in the chat about experimental aircraft. So maybe that'll clarify it. Let you guys answer that one, then I'll get to mine.
He's heard underwriters. Adam is our government affairs individual, and he is hearing underwriters say crazy, uneducated things about Alaska, like half the pilots don't have a license. What can we do to educate them about the reality of flying in Alaska?
I think that's a great point, and it kind of leads to exactly why we opened up an office up here. Specifically, one of the insurance companies that we work with, when we approached them to write business in Alaska, they told us no, because we didn't have an office up here. Because they know how close the pilot community, the Alaska community is. And once we opened up an office, they felt a little bit more comfortable with us writing business with them. And I think there is a lack of communication sometimes between agents and underwriters. And so underwriters just hear, unfortunately, the bad stories. And I think there's a lot of agents out there that are afraid to pick up the phone and have real conversations with underwriters and give them, it's not just a number, right? So we talk about you need this amount of make and model time to be qualified in an aircraft. You work with BWI, we don't just look at your hours. We get on the phone and we talk to you and we try to find out the credibility that you have as a pilot and as an individual. And so I think that there's a gap in between the information there's a gap between what's happening and then the details that the underwriters are getting. And so I know for us specifically, our underwriters, they'll look online for information about the aircraft to make sure that, it's the right aircraft that they're insuring. But we get on the phone and we try to explain to them, hey, let me give you a little bit of information about our customer. Let me tell you, what he does as a business, how many hours he's flying as an airline transport pilot. Maybe he's not qualified in this aircraft, but he's current. And so I can agree, I think there's a lot of stories that underwriters hear, but they don't hear the good things that are happening and they don't hear the positive stories. And I think that's something that we do. I don't know, I can't speak on other agencies. I think it's just about continuing to share that knowledge with the underwriters. So that way, hopefully, as time progresses, we can share some of those positive stories. So then that way they're not having these negative thoughts in their head about this community. Because again, there's a very, was it Adam, right? Who asked the question? Like Adam was saying, they say pilots are flying without their licenses. Pilots are flying when they're not current. I don't necessarily see that, at least through our agency. Again, we work with quite a few pilots up here. And I love all of my Alaska pilots. There is not, anyone that I would say I've never had to turn away a pilot because we didn't feel that he was providing the right information or that he was saying he had a license that he didn't have. So again, I think those are just stories that are kind of caught in the past. And I think that those conversations aren't being had with underwriters that we're trying to have with them. So again, open their eyes to not feel like this is, again, a bad community to insure. I think it's very much the opposite.
Yeah, and what we did is, COVID derailed obviously last year's gathering, but the gathering the years before that, what we do is we have a booth at the gathering. A lot of you guys have probably seen us there, and we will email or call our underwriters and say, hey, come on up here and come to our booth and let me show you what's going on up here. And so we've had 3 or 4 underwriters from our companies fly up here, come to the gathering, and they'll stand next to our booth and I'm like, hey, underwriter, here's your insured. You wrote this policy. Come talk to him. Come say hi. So we've done that. We're working on that. We want to do it this year. This year was crazy rushed, obviously. And the underwriters, most of their companies won't let them travel with COVID. But next year we'll be back at the gathering and hopefully we'll have a couple more underwriters up here so they can see what's going on.
So I can't imagine, going back again to the data and the statistics. No license or whatever. I mean, that's an easy out for them. They're not going to cover it. So
Right.
I'm not even sure why that's a factor.
Right.
And what happens is it's because even though they're not going to cover it, a lot of times they still have to pay for the legal liability to not cover it. And so let's just say, for example, let's say Matt owns an aircraft. I don't know if I talked that loud. Let's say Matt has an aircraft and I'm a student pilot and I'm not covered on his policy and I jump in it and I go and fly it because he said it was okay. And we get into an accident and the next thing you know, now he's being sued and his insurance company now has to step up and say, well, wait, we're not covering it because she wasn't covered, but they're still gonna have to fight the litigation. And so that's their perspective, unfortunately. Not saying we agree with it, but that's kind of their stance on that, is they still have to pay to not pay.
Okay, Adam, we were on the wrong speaker, so you should be able to talk now if you want to add anything you can.
Yeah, I'm not sure who asked that follow-up question, but thank you, because I was going to mention the same thing. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Still can't hear me, can you?
I can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you, Adam.
They can all hear you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Hello, Anchorage. Can you hear us? Hello, Anchorage. Testing 1, 2, 3. Anchorage,
you
can
are.
you hear me? Okay. Yeah, so I appreciate the follow-up question there in the audience. I can see bodies, but I can't see faces. So whoever that was, thank you, because that was going to be one of the things I asked. The willful violators, if we could use that term, are not usually the ones who are going after insurance, but it's the liability that the insurance companies are trying to protect themselves from. But it is really crazy, some of the stories I've heard from underwriters about their opinion of Alaska. And it's offensive, to be honest with you, because that may have been a little more true in the past. I don't think that it ever was wholly true that most of the pilots in Alaska have never had licenses. But anyway, it is frustrating when we are trying to do the best we can and we are fighting against attitudes on the underwriter's part where they just don't have all the good information. So.
Absolutely, and to give you guys, some feedback, we feel that, so when you guys call in, you have, policies that you don't know. So especially if you also have business here, especially being here in local, especially for us not be able to provide those services to you, which is why, we're big on, I would say everybody on texting, emails, and all that stuff. We're big in our office, our employees are always on the phone, like all the phone underwriters, because if you get a lot more information across, you get a lot more feedback as to, again, why some of these comments are being made or why certain products aren't available. So while it's frustrating, to you guys, it's very frustrating for us. Our goal here is to bring the service to you guys and not have to be on call. We have a seminar, I know there's one last week to go to back in Southern California. And so part of when we do this, someone called Mario, and the first thing I'm going to you're 77, or because you're on floats. Like all of a sudden, we start checking off these boxes that we can't, provide you services for. So our goal ultimately is not, it's not going to happen today or it's not going to happen tomorrow, but it's for the long term to be able to continue to educate the underwriters as to what's happening up here. So eventually these products and services can be available at some point. So we're not here to, just be here for the short term. We're here to make a difference long term, and it's definitely going to take some time. Like Matt said, we're really close with our underwriters, so we like to bring them out here. But again, it's it takes time for them to kind of open their eyes and change their perspective, because like Adam was saying, maybe that's something that happened in the past, but it's not something that we're seeing so much today. Now they just need to see that as well.
Okay, let's see. I have a question from Paul now. He has a microphone. He's ready to ask. Paul, you can ask a question.
Thanks a lot for taking this. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay, great. Yeah, I didn't have a mic on my other computer. So yeah, I was just wondering about underwriting experimental amateur built aircraft in Alaska. Do you do that at all? Do you do just liability, or do you do liability and hull insurance? How's that process work?
So we can certainly do both. We can do hull and liability. There are, depending on the make and model, depending on the kit that you're sure, that's going to change things. So generally speaking, can we offer it? Yes. But again, just like any other risk, it's going to depend on the make and model. It's going to depend on the pilot experience. If you're looking at a brand new build, trying to get that initial fly-off time up in Alaska is a little bit more challenging to get covered. But once that fly-off time is completed, we do have markets that can certainly offer that. Again, just going to depend on the specifics of the make and model, and then the pilot to go along with that.
So the initial fly-off would not be covered, or you'd have to go for somewhere else, and then once the fly-off time is accomplished, then you would then reapply, I guess, for getting something else?
So with the companies that we currently write with, and I'm like 99.9% sure we don't have a market currently in Alaska that covers the fly-off period. I know, and everybody handles it a little bit differently. Some insurance companies will just exclude certain coverages during the fly-off time, so like they won't cover the hull, but they'll cover the liability. So it's going to change case by case, but generally speaking, I can't remember the last time I had an insurance company up here cover the fly-off period. But once that's completed, hull and liability are both available.
All righty, thank you.
A little bit of a follow-up question to that. I'm in the process of building an experimental, and I was trying to, acquire insurance on it for next year when it's ready to fly. I understand the file periods are risky times, so it probably won't be covered. I'll probably assume the risk on that myself. But I can't even get a quote from any company to insure this after it's built. I understand it's not liable yet, doesn't have a tail number, so that presents some challenges. What does it mean if I can't get a quote from anybody? And the frustration with that is I understand if you can't cover it with my level of experience, but then I can't get a number of how many tailwheel hours do you need, how many hours of making model do you need before you will be able to obtain it. Because I could go out and get that if I knew what it was going to be potentially, but without knowing, it's all a big mystery. Sort of like the guys that are aging out, they don't have a solid number. It'd be one thing if they said, okay, we can't cover you at 75 because the accident rates are too high above 75, but it's all kind of mysterious. The data's not out there. So in regards to experimental, if I can't get an insurance policy at all, can you speak to what that means for me? What should I?
Yeah, so I would say a lot of it comes down to who you work with. So let's just say, for example, and I'm just going to make up something. So say you're doing an experimental cub and you have no tailwheel time and no tailwheel experience. We already know we're not going to be able to get you a rate based off of that, but there's an opportunity for a discussion to say, hey, if you're a year away from finishing your aircraft, I'd suggest trying to build up 25 to 50 hours of tailwheel experience. And hey, if you can do that in a cub, doesn't have to be experimental, that's going to be a little bit more beneficial for you. So a lot of it comes down to who you're working with. And then I believe too, the relationships that each agency has with underwriters is very important as well. Because I can think of a handful of underwriters that I can pick up the phone and call and say, hey, I have a client, this is their situation. I know you can't guarantee me anything, but what can I advise them to shoot for? Or what targets can I give them? And then they'll kind of give us some feedback, like, hey, we won't look at it if they have less than 50 hours, we want the fly off time to be completed. So we can have those conversations to kind of give you the right advice for your situation. The last thing you probably want is to build this beautiful aircraft and then now you want to fly it and you can't get insurance anywhere. And you also don't know what requirements you need in order to obtain insurance.
Yeah, I can assume some of the risk myself and fly uninsured, but that's what has to be done.
Right.
Just be super conservative, but what you would say is fly 50 hours, 100 hours in type if you can, come back, try to get a policy again, just reassess after you acquire experience with the accident, you're fine. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And like I said, a lot of it is conversation. There's going to be a lot of things that we can't offer terms for, let's say in the moment, but we can give advice, and I think that's kind of something that sets us apart a little bit up here is that if I can't provide a service, but I know a VEMCO can, I will 100% suggest you to go to a VEMCO, or I'll provide solutions to, maybe another agency that I know has a market that we don't have. Because ultimately it's not just us creating a business, it's us providing a resource for you guys to get the services that you need. And so a 20-30 minute phone call can, set you up for the next year. And now you know what you need to do. Once your fly off time is ready, then we can, provide you with what you're looking for.
Would the experience threshold for a liability only policy be conceivable before you've got the full coverage the whole way of your thing?
So it might be a little bit easier to obtain a liability only policy, but I would still, like, for example, on a tailwheel aircraft, I'd still give you the same targets. Because again, for the insurance company's point of view, if that aircraft goes down, let's just say it runs into another person or whatnot, they're still on the policy for that $1 million limit. So you want to have something under your belt, because again, it makes, when we go to an underwriter, it makes it a little easier for us to present your case and negotiate with the underwriter to get terms versus coming in with no experience at all. Does that answer that for you?
Pretty much. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
How about medical? First, second, third class, basic med? How's that affect?
So that's not going to affect your premium. Yeah, so with all of the insurance companies that we write with, they all accept basic med. I know it's very popular these days. The only time that will change is there are a few insurance companies that, let's just say at a certain age, they might say at like 75, 77, it's going to depend. They might come back and say, okay, moving forward, we want this pilot to have a third class medical every year. But the companies that we write with, again, medicals aren't impacting your premium, but depending on age, as we get a little bit older, they might come back and say, okay, instead of basic med, we want to see that third class. I haven't had anybody turn down basic med yet, though. Right? Yes, sir.
This gentleman made a good point about insurance being, companies being very data driven. And I've seen some articles that have made comments that Alaska has a higher rate of plane accidents, a lower fatality rate. I've tried to find the data for Alaska and I can't find it because I don't think the FAA tries to break out the hours which you need to come up with a rate. Do the rates even exist for Alaska?
The statistic, the claims, yeah, I mean, you can go to the NTSB and they have whatever's reported to them, right? They have those statistics, but that's all the statistics we have. We have our claim
Same
data,
access, yeah.
but we don't have the company's claim data. We don't know.
Because it's just their loss, their particular loss experience with their own mileage.
The companies?
Yeah.
Yeah, they have underwriting guidelines. They have, I'm sure they have huge data centers and their lower 48 data in Alaska and claims. I don't know how those algorithms work, but I'm sure they are all very data driven.
So they don't share that data with you?
They do not, no, we don't know.
We can review our own claim losses with our underwriters for our own agency, but overall speaking, we can't. And one thing that drives, rates up here when it comes down to claims is, for example, and I'll speak, and Maddie can back me up on this. I had a customer land on a lake that was frozen and the ice broke and his ski and wheel went straight through the ice. There was absolutely no damage done to the aircraft, but the cost that the insurance company had to pay to retrieve the aircraft was substantial. And so, again, no damage to any person, nobody was injured, the aircraft was in perfect condition, but they had to pay a pretty penny to just get the aircraft out. And so up here, unfortunately, that's what the insurance companies are running into. So it's not just loss, it's not just individual losses as far as like bodily injury or aircraft being totaled. A lot of times that factor of just having to retrieve the aircraft, even if it's not damaged, is driving that rate up. Because I think a helicopter retrieval out here sometimes can be anywhere from $20,000 to $30,000 to go in and get a perfectly good aircraft and just move it to the next closest airport. And so that's something up here that gets paid out a lot that we don't see in the lower 48.
Well, so let's add on to that. Is there any type of like a retrieval insurance or?
Your policy includes it.
Usually between $10,000 to $20,000 of your call. There's a special coverage that includes off-airport retrieval.
So how would that work? You blow a tire on some, or some happens to float.
So there's two ways. If you land off airport and the aircraft's not damaged, you didn't have an accident, you just landed off the airport and the engine won't start or something and you need to get back to the airport, there's a coverage called off-airport retrieval. You turn it in, get a helicopter, they'll get you back. If you land off airport and there's an accident, then you turn the claim in under your insurance policy and the adjuster, the insurance company will figure out how to get that aircraft back. It's part of the policy.
I've always been kind of curious about that.
Yeah.
What's the type of insurance? That would certainly be a decent product to have up here.
Yeah.
The more people that you can get into it.
Bigger pool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And let's say, for example, your aircraft's insured for $100,000. Okay, aircraft's insured for $100,000. You land on a dirt strip or somewhere, and you have a ground loop, prop strike, something, and the insurance company and you can't fly it out. Okay, the insurance company looks at that. We insure this airplane for $100,000. Maybe there's only $10,000 of damages, but if we can't pick that airplane up, take it back to an airport and repair it, then we're going to have to write him a check for $100,000. So now they've got to spend 10, 15, 20,000, get the helicopter, get it back. And now a $10,000 plane turns into 20, 30, 35,000. That extra, that's part of why the rates are a little bit higher. We see that happen a lot.
If I damage my aircraft slightly or something, I won't turn over the insurance.
Right.
Put too much work into it.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, seriously, that may be something that, they do it with their medical services or whatever, they pay a subscription every year. But, if you get $100,000 off of that, that's a pretty substantial amount. That's something that you guys can put together.
Yeah.
A retrieval policy.
Retrieval policy. Yeah, we're good with that. Sure.
You had another question?
Oh yeah, I was going to speak to this point. I did my college thesis on the accident rates in Alaska. And the year 2000 until 2 years ago when I finished the paper, the accident rates, unfortunately, are 2 to 3 times higher up here. But as you said, the fatal accident rate is about half to 75% what it is compared to lower 48. So that's probably driving the higher rates up here. And then you have to think about in Alaska, how many accidents go unreported that aren't in the NTSB database. Based on the mechanics I've talked to, probably a lot. Those do get claimed for the insurance companies too, probably. But then my question to follow up on that would be, do you guys offer any reduced risk policies, like maybe a policy where, okay, you can't fly off airport for this airplane, it's all or nothing up here, so you just accept all the risks associated with flying in Alaska, and everything goes with it, or nothing, pretty much.
Yes.
Yeah.
So our policies are exclusionary policies. So in our aircraft insurance policies, everything is covered unless it's excluded in the policy exclusions. So we've had customers say, hey, show me where it says I can land off airport. Our policies cover you can land on a dirt strip anywhere. There's no restrictions. There are no exclusions in the policy. So there's no place in the policy that says you may land on a dirt strip on the beach or whatever, but there's no exclusion that says you may only land on paved strips. So that's kind of how our policies are written.
Yes, there's no way for somebody that maybe couldn't get a policy with no exclusions to then say, well, let's put some exclusions in and see if I can get a policy.
Yeah.
They're not written that
Okay.
specifically to each individual,
Right.
correct?
Adam, do you want to jump in with your question?
Yeah, sure, if you don't mind. So the gentleman who was just speaking is off camera, and I'm sorry I don't recognize your voice, but question for you about the accident rate in your research and studies. I understand that the underwriters are looking at a calendar year and a financial year and the cost that is outlaid per customer basis. But when you say the accident rates in comparison to the rest of the United States, and is that on a per calendar year, or is that 100,000 flight hours? I mean, we can make numbers say all kinds of things, and I'm just kind of curious what the basis are of those.
Yeah, so the basis for that research was the estimated flight hours for the FAA, because the FAA takes an estimated number of flight hours for each region in the US. So it reports its estimated number of flight hours in Alaska alone. And then you take the accidents, the number of accidents reported in the same time frame, divide the number of accidents by the FAA's number of estimated flight hours to come up with the accident rate. So that number was derived from both the TSB database for the number of accidents, and then the estimated number of flight hours given by the FAA, which again is just an estimate because they don't go out and read the hog meters and every airplane out here, but that's how the number is derived. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so that is off of actual flight time instead of just calendar time.
Yeah, so they don't publish the accident rate. They don't go in and collect the data and do the division for you, but the number of flight hours is available from the FAA broken down by region, and Alaska is its own region for a number of flight hours from the FAA, and then you have to go search the number of accidents in the state, and you come up with it.
If there's any chance I could have an opportunity to read that, I would love to do that. They've got my contact information there at the office.
Yeah, I'll have
If you don't.
forward it to you.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got a question from Timothy. Timothy, you can ask your question.
So what is the availability of per seat sublimits above $100,000 a seat? Because one could argue that all that policy gives you is a defense. And I'm curious as to, for private pilots, not commercial, what is the availability to purchase insurance greater than 100,000 a seat for a typical private pilot?
Very difficult in Alaska. Shocker. No, up here in Alaska, it is definitely a little more difficult to obtain higher limits than 100,000. We have one insurance company that might consider it, but they're pretty stickler on keeping to that 100,000. Obviously, if you're operating a charter or anything of that nature, insurance companies automatically offer you 150,000 per seat passenger for the requirements. But again, obtaining higher limits, not just up in Alaska, also is dependent on the type of aircraft that you're flying, the type of pilot experience that you bring to the table. The more experience you have, especially in the make and model, the easier it is for us as agents to negotiate with underwriters to offer higher limits. I would say the highest limit I've ever seen offered in Alaska is going to be 250 per seat. And that's the highest I've ever seen. That's not a commercial policy or just your standard recreational pilot.
If you already have higher, will it help you if you decide to go to a different carrier for price reasons to obtain it again?
If you have higher, I would suggest you don't leave your current carrier.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But I wouldn't want to steer anybody in the wrong direction. But yeah, if you have higher than, you know, that 100,000 per passenger limit right now, it's, for being realistic, especially in the way the market is today, I would suggest keeping that product, maybe looking at it in the next couple of years as the market starts to hopefully come back down. But yeah, if you have anything higher, just because it is difficult to obtain, I would suggest you really want to keep that policy in place.
Anybody have any other questions? It's about 4 o'clock, yes, sir.
I have a 170 that I'm insured with them. I've been with them, I don't know, probably 8 or 9 years. And my son has a 172. Now, I do know with my age and it's tail dragger 170, my premium is higher than my son's. But what is there a break point between the tail dragger and the tricycle here? How is that? I mean, every insurance company, I guess, look at tail dragger as being, you know,
High risk.
high risk. And that's probably true because there are problems out there. But in my mind, I'm trying, with my age and everything, trying to determine if I shouldn't just partner with my son with the 170 to save the cost of the 170 insurance. This is very high.
Well, I think that the reality too, unfortunately, to get a very bad news is that it will continue to go up. And, you know, anything that's tail wheel, high performance, complex, for that senior pilot community, your rates are pretty much almost guaranteed to go up year after year after the age of 75.
I'm seeing that happen.
Yes, and no matter how qualified you are, no matter how many hours you've flown, no matter how current you are, that's just the nature of the business. And so, you know, I've had a lot of clients that will do that. They'll switch down to, you know, a Cessna 72, Cessna 182, something fixed gear, just to save on the insurance. But there's no set number that says, okay, all tail wheel aircrafts are going to be a minimum 35% higher than a standard fixed gear aircraft. Unfortunately, there's no number that we could, you know, give to you. And I'm sure you've probably been flying for a long time and you're wondering why you have to pay more insurance than maybe your son, who at one point was a newer pilot.
Well, I've noticed that it's gone up all over the years. I won't say as much as 10% a year. The last 3 or 4 years, it's gone up about 10%.
And that's very typical, unfortunately. And then unfortunately at 80, our pilot, I mean, we have pilots that are flying early 80s and close to mid 80s. I think our office just worked with one this week, with no restrictions to fly. But you can expect at 80, if you, again, high performance complex tail wheel, your premium is going to take a very substantial increase at that point. So just obviously things to keep in mind.
Do the insurance companies look at it like each year they look at it, we get 75, automatically it's going to go up X%?
No, there's no like perfect number, unfortunately, but age is definitely a variable. A couple of factors that help, like for us as agents, the longer we've been with an insurance company, again, we operate a little bit different. I think we get on the phone, we talk to our underwriters quite a bit. So let's just say you go from 74 to 75 and your premium increases $600. You can almost guarantee one of our agents is on the phone with the insurance company. Hey, Matt's been with you for 10 years. He's flown plane free. He's flown his own aircraft 100+ hours this year. Can we negotiate the increase? And so maybe what was a $600 increase is now a $300 increase. Still an increase, but it gives us some negotiating points. So we, again, try to work on behalf of our clients. So before you even see a renewal quote, you should know and trust that your agents are doing everything that they can to present you the best terms available at that time. Yes, sir.
Kind of said something here that's contradictory. I'm downgrading to the 182. So do you have your own insurance, have your own complex, high performance, or do you follow the FAA's?
Even as far as like horsepower and all that. So, I mean, because I know 182 can technically be high performance dependent, right? And so I'm looking more at, for example, like for senior pilots, anything that's gonna be complex as far as retractable gear, that's gonna automatically have a higher insurance premium than a 182 fixed gear. So that's gonna be, oh, I mean, so it depends on which way you look at it, but if we're talking about configuration, I would say you should have a cheaper premium on a 182 versus a 180 because of just the configuration of the aircraft.
Fixed floats versus amphibious.
Cheaper. Yeah, just because of the, again, because of the complex, you have to remember to bring your wheels up, before landing. And then the other thing that's going to drive that too is typically your premiums, or excuse me, your policy includes the coverage of the floats. And a lot of times amphibious floats are substantially higher in value than say your straight floats, unless you're buying a brand new set. But yeah, and straight floats are going to be a lot cheaper than insuring an amphibious float.
I'm actually thinking about taking mine off, and just leaving them up here this year and going back down on wheels. So.
We've had a lot of clients do that this year because of the spike in rates. We've had a lot of clients that I just spoke with one the other day and he was like, I'm not even, but I think it was a 206 up here. He came in, he was like, I took them off, they're staying off, like I just want to go wheels only because the rates are just substantially high. Yeah.
Were you able to identify the problem and then just for the cost of those 6 companies that were 6 went out of business in 2018? Can you give us a straight note on what caused that? Was it a spike in accident rates? And so were there particular aircraft types or demographics?
It's a lot of different things. One of the things is increased cost of repair. When you're repairing, there's a lot of older 1950s, 1960s aircraft. When one of those crashes, if you have to repair it, the parts to repair those airplanes are going up. So there's an increased cost of repair. That's one of them. Increased liability awards. There's a lot of big liability payouts and big mid-air accidents, King Airs, tourism companies, things like that. There was a lot of that over the last couple of years. And then what you had is you're in the bottom of a 10-year cycle. So every rate is very, very low. So the insurance companies have a lot less premium to pay out all these things. So that's what happened. That's kind of the gist of it. I mean, there's a lot of different factors, but they just couldn't pay all the claims that were happening and all this kind of stuff. You can't pay the claims and they go out of business. In a nutshell.
Well, along those lines, that was heard that the Boeing Max and the Kobe Bryant crashes were driving our rates. Is that?
That's definitely part of it. Yeah, oh yeah, because the aircraft insurance companies we write with, they will partner together and they'll write, big air carriers like Boeing, Delta, and all those kind of things. And those companies are backed up by reinsurance companies. So if one of our companies insured Alaska Airlines and they have an accident and a couple hundred people perish, that company is going to go out of business. So they can't write it on their own. So they have to get reinsurance companies to back them up. So they all take a percentage of it. So when you have reinsurance companies and you have Boeing Max and liability and everything, the reinsurance companies actually tell the insurance companies, you are going to raise your rates. If we're going to back you, you're going to raise your rates because we just can't afford to pay these claims anymore. If that helps.
But going back to what I was saying earlier, it's like, every time I see a tornado go through, Tallahassee or something like that.
It's 100 airplanes or 150
Yeah,
airplanes.
it's like, shit, there goes my race.
Yep.
So there needs to be a penalty to those folks for losing their aircraft in a storm.
Yeah. Well, there's hurricane relocation. This is not a tornado, but a hurricane, for example. There's hurricane relocation coverage built into your aircraft insurance policy. So there's $500 to pay for you to move your airplane.
There's incentives.
There's incentives to move your airplane.
It's not enough though.
Yeah.
Apparently
It's not
not.
right. Yeah, it's definitely not. But and unfortunately, it's what the phrase is, the loss of the few are paid by the many, right? So all of those that are insured, we're all paying into this pot of insurance. And I had a client one time tell me when he canceled his policy, he's like, I did the math and I paid you guys over like $45,000 and how many years of insurance and you never pulled into your own pot. And so it's unfortunate, it's the unnecessary evil. But we see that all the time where the underwriters are like, well, Boeing, for example, and my father worked for Boeing, so I got to hear both sides of it, when the MAX happened. And that's what I think, and that went down in history as one of our biggest aviation grounding claims, because the insurance companies had to pay every single day that those planes were grounded for the loss of income to Boeing. And so unfortunately that trickles down to you guys. And then like you said, now you're paying the cost of somebody else's, excuse my French, but stupid accident, right? And you've flown maybe 10 or 15 years with no losses. So it's just, unfortunately, I think that's the unnecessary evil about any insurance industry, but especially this one.
Can you speak to maybe a hypothetical where if somebody has a minor incident, doesn't rise to the level of totally irritated or anything, they have an insurance policy. Is there any way to address the calculus between paying out of pocket to cover something on your own versus taking the risk of losing your policy or making a claim and having your rates go up substantially? Do you give advice to people that obviously whether the customer always pay for their stuff, you don't have to, but is there anything to think about?
That's a great question. Absolutely. So that's our job as brokers. Call us when something happens. Call us and have that conversation with us. It's definitely going to be on a case-by-case basis. How long have you been with that insurance company? What type of airplane do you have? How old are you? Have you had any other claims? What is the damage? What do you estimate the damage to be? Is it 1,000, 5,000, 10,000? All those things are going to go into when we look at the file, we're going to look at everything and we're going to say, this is what we've seen happen when a similar insured has turned a claim in. This is what we've seen happen at renewal. They get non-renewed, their rate goes up 30, 40, 50%. And it's the entire picture. You have to look at it each one at a time.
Case by case.
Case by case, yeah.
And we're certainly not the experts. I've gone as far as having a lot of my clients turn in the claim just so they can talk to an adjuster or a claims manager at an insurance company. And they have this conversation and then all of a sudden they're like, you know what, I'm just gonna pay it out of pocket. And then you choose to not proceed with the claim. So those are definitely things. I just had one the other day where he's like, I'm not too sure. And I was like, well, you know what, we can report it. Somebody can come out, look at it, you guys can get the cost of repair. And then if it's something you decide to pay out of pocket, you can certainly go that route, or you can proceed turning it in.
But it doesn't get held against you unless you actually go through.
I've never seen it come back because we asked, have you ever had an insurance company pay out on a claim? Yeah.
Would that $500 hurricane transport fee count as a claim?
No, that's not a claim. That's a benefit to the policy. So underwriters will actually call and they'll send us notices when hurricanes are coming into certain territories, and they'll advise please, because for them $500 is a lot cheaper than paying a $50,000 whole payout when it's total. And so they encourage that we remind our clients that those services are available, but they don't negatively impact you at all.
So then we'll extend that to Alaska to the helicopter lift to the closest airport.
Right? I wish, yeah. Good topic to bring up, absolutely. Something to think about.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a market for somebody to come up with people, insurance. I think there's sufficient number of pilots up here, try to pay a couple $100 a year to
just have that
Yeah.
peace of mind, absolutely. That brings up a good point.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Could you just restate for any latecomers what we can control that might help lower our rates as aircraft owners? I hear a lot that we can't control, but there's some things that we can.
Yeah, so I would say, like I said, make and model time in that aircraft, that's the number one factor. The instrument ticket definitely helps. Any commercial ATP, that helps too, but not as much as the private and the instrument rating. So that make and model time. The next thing is probably type, tail wheel, retractable, C, that kind of stuff really helps. As far as the actual rate itself, your aircraft insurance policy has liability coverage in Mil 100. That's like 15 to 20% of the rate. That's really a little bit of the rate. 80% of it is your whole coverage of the aircraft itself. So if you're insuring your airplane at 50,000 versus an airplane at 200,000, that's what's increasing the premium. So you definitely don't want to overinsure, you don't want to underinsure, you want to insure your airplane, of course, what it's worth if you had to replace that airplane. But the whole cost, that's the big driving factor of the rates. The liability is not a big portion of that.
And I would say to kind of summarize too, currency. Right
Currency,
now, the biggest
absolutely.
thing our insurance companies are looking for is that is not just current, but current in your own aircraft. So you're an airline transport pilot and you're flying 400 hours a year, but you don't fly your 180 more than 5 hours a year, that's going to impact your rate. So when you're asking what are things that you can personally do, I know it's difficult, life gets in the way, but staying as current as possible in your own insured aircraft, that's where we as agents have the most wiggle room. because somebody that's only flown 5 hours versus somebody that's flown 75 hours in the make and model. And a lot of times our insurance companies, especially right now coming out of COVID, they're looking for pilots and they won't even release renewal terms until we can provide updated hours. So like all week long, our agents were in the office calling, following up, hey, how many hours have you flown in the last 12 months? Because that can directly impact a rate increase. So that's probably what I would say currently is one of the biggest driving factors.
My annual recurrence of training, and I'm sure it does with twins and stuff, but
So if you're doing those things on your own, it never hurts to, so what my underwriters tell me is it never hurts to report that. So if I can make a phone call and say, hey, you know, Matt's flown 100 hours and he's also participated in this safety training seminar. He's also done X, Y, and Z over the last 12 months. Again, they're not guaranteed rate decreases, but if you're working with agents that you trust are relaying this information, I've absolutely had underwriters come back and be like, okay, let me take a second look. Because they might have a standard increase that they're putting on all their policies. But if we could present a case that says, hey, this pilot's a little bit more qualified than the next one, they're willing to take a second look at it. And those things, I would say, it never hurts to ask. And again, that goes back to us having good relationships with our underwriters. We have no problem picking up the phone, asking them a question. The worst they're going to tell us is, no, go back to your client and say, sorry, we can't do that. Or we can't offer a premium decrease for that. But at least we can say we tried.